Welcome to The Self-Led Woman. This is a podcast about emotional eating, the experiences that shape our relationships with food, and the path back to self-leadership. These conversations go beneath behavior, held with deep respect for the wisdom of the body and the ways it learned to cope, adapt, and survive. And when we can peel back those layers and meet the parts of ourselves that need care, we begin to see that food was never the problem and we can return to who we really are. I'm your host, Megan Darnell. Let's dive right in. So I'm so excited to welcome today's guest, Kallie Klug. Kallie is a certified somatic practitioner and yoga teacher. She has international certifications in therapeutic yoga, women's embodiment, somatic parts work, and integrative somatic trauma therapy. She also studied traditional yoga, breath work, and meditation at its birthplace in the Himalayas of Rishikesh, India. Kallie is currently enrolled in training for a certification as a somatic experiencing practitioner. Kallie's teachings are grounded in somatic psychology and traditional embodiment practices to help those who experience her work to access the inner wisdom of their own bodies. She believes we all have the key within ourselves to stop outsourcing our healing and unlock potent empowerment from within. Kallie is also the author of Tired of Being Good, a nervous system map for reclaiming your body after a lifetime of fawning. Welcome to the podcast, Kallie.
Thank you. It's the first time I've heard the author part, so I'm really feeling that right now.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Amazing. It is very exciting. And before we jumped on, we were just chatting, and I was saying to Kelly, I've been reading her book, and yeah, it's really amazing, which we'll obviously get into in our discussion, and a very easy, I think, practical read for people who have had a lifetime of fawning.
Um,
So to kick us off, for anyone who's never come across your work before or you, how would you describe what it is that you do?
yeah, so I work with, somatic psychology. So soma is the ancient Greek word for body. So anything that's somatic, it's a really broad term. It's really just anything having to do with the body. And so what I do is somatic trauma therapy. And so it's trauma therapy really focused on the nervous system instead of the cognitive. There's definitely cognitive understanding that happens in the process, but instead of that being the main channel that we work through, really the main one is the body and the nervous system. And then I work particularly with the fawn response, which is the fourth trauma response. So most people are familiar with fight or flight. In fight, your body is propelled towards the threat to fight it. In flight, the body is propelled away. And then there's freeze, where the energy is kind of brought into itself, and the body says the safest thing for me to do here is to cease to exist. So there's a numbing that happens, dissociation. And then with fawning, it's the appeasement response. So it's the body going towards the threat to appease it and secure safety through relationship and connection. But there's always this social engagement aspect, always coupled with an inner tension, always coupled with a suppressed boundary. It's not just being friendly or being nice. There's always this coupling of an inner, frozen boundary expression with fawn.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
can you take us on a journey of how this work became personal for you?
Yeah. So, um, yeah, let me think about that. Well, I grew up in a very religious context. And then I also was at school in a just a mean girl frenemy group from about the eight, and I write about this in my book. It's in the very first chapter. From the age of about 9 or 10 all the way up till I was 16. I was a part of this mean girl frenemy group, and I feel like in my home life, I definitely had already learned the art of fawning with my caregivers, but in this context, it was just honed and perfected and praised. Like, I found a lot of solace and utility, like being the therapist friend. People were not as aggressive towards me when I was really nice or really small or quiet. And so eventually it kind of just felt like my personality. And I was like, this is just who I am. It got rewarded in my serving jobs and I was working in restaurants, in my relationships where people, praise you for being, oh, you just get along with everyone. You are so easy to be around or easy to host, like so needless. And then when I started getting therapy when I was about 23, 24, I realized, wow, I actually have so much anger underneath all of this. Like this exterior of everything's fine and I'm good. Underneath it all, I was seething, and that had been present for me that whole time. But I think that was the first time I started to connect to it, and that was kind of the start of my unfawning.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think a lot of like people will see a lot of themselves in your story and just like those kinds of experiences. I mean, in my work, because I'm an IFS practitioner, we speak to fawning being like the people pleasing part, you know? But when I think about that, I guess through my own experience, it's like the people pleasing, it becomes like part of your personality, part of your nature. You think that that's who you are. And it's like unlearning that. I mean, it's so embedded. And in your book, you write about it being like a reflex. And I see this constantly with women that I work with around food because
Mm.
like like these women, they are so sensitive, intuitive little girls that when they're expressing all their emotions, they're told they're too much, they're too sensitive. And it's like, so then they retract, you know, become that person that gets them the praise or you're being a good girl. Can you speak to how, I guess, good girl conditioning shapes the nervous system and why fawning becomes so automatic?
Yeah. Well, I think culturally, women especially are really, really primed to take up the least amount of space possible. I know for me, like, even in this process, speaking louder and just not even on purpose, but just letting my voice fill my lungs in a space, has felt like evolution to me in a world where I'm told that I'm better when I'm quiet and palatable.
Mm,
I think it really does shape the nervous system. Like, I love how you said that because it actually makes me angry. I feel angry about it too. Um, yeah, I think that when I think all women are extremely familiar with that experience of having to take up less space, and that is so linked to fawning. Like you said, I mean, a lot of times we see fawning happen as a suppression of some kind of boundary expression, but also, like you said, oh, people that are sensitive or have been told that they're too much, like their joy is too much or their sorrow is too much. Like that too, when we don't feel like, oh, my joy is palatable or my joy is off-putting to people. That too we suppress, and that also gets frozen in the body. And anything that's frozen, there's always that presence of constriction and bracing, and yeah, I think it really changes the physiology and literally changes the structure of the body because any kind of posturing that we hold long term, like the body's so intelligent that anything we do repeatedly, it assembles our literal tissues to support that. So if I'm like I notice this even on my phone, my right hand and forearm are so much more developed in the musculature because 'cause I'm always on my phone. And so when we're always in this, like, chronic bracing, we get these issues around our neck, our thyroid, people get TMJ. It's very physical. It's not some, like, woo-woo thing of, like, "Oh, yeah, like, women, it affects us." It's like, no, literally physically affects our the structure of our body. Yeah.
Absolutely. I've spoken about that in the podcast before and how, I mean, I've learnt this from my own trauma training, but you see it now, like in the street, I'll see some girl and she's like not like she's quite young and she's hunched over, like, like a little old lady. And I'm just like, oh, wow, like what happened there? And even facial expressions, I've spoken about that, like micro expressions. And for, I guess, an untrained eye, they're not necessarily going to see it, but it's you'll just meet someone and you're like, "Oh, I don't know about them." Like they seem kind of weird or whatever, but it's like they've had a lot of trauma and there's very micro expressions that mirror fear or things like that. Like it does show up in the body, it does show up in the face. It's not yeah, woo woo or it's undeniable really. Like our bodies are
I love the example you said too of like, the posture. I'm a huge Taylor Swift fan, and it made me think of Taylor Swift, where early in her career, she was so hunched over, and
Mm.
she's tall, and I'm a tall girl too, and I remember that feeling of like, "Oh, I don't wanna take up too much space," and so there's this, like yeah, but it's crazy, your body tells on you. It's kind of annoying, but yeah, it does.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't even think of the Taylor Swift example, but now that you say it, I'm like, "Oh, yes, I've never clocked that," but I'm like, "She did." And now she's, like, taking up more space.
Yeah, her body like, her posturing is so different now, she's like her heart is, like, open. It's also so protective too. I feel like I wanna mention that too of, like, the the intelligence is there too of it's, like, physically protecting the heart space, you know,
Mhm.
wrapping
Yes.
around, yeah.
Yeah, and, like, the organs as well, like, a little bit different, but, I mean, we in IFS, I've spoken about in say if someone's, like, holding weight and they're quote unquote, like, they're trying to lose weight, but they're doing all the quote unquote "right things." I've worked with people and it's like you ask the part, like, "What is it doing?" And it's literally carrying extra protection to protect the organs because their boundaries have been crossed too many times.
Wow.
So intelligent.
Mhm.
So to speak to food, so if you really draw this powerful parallel between fawning and eating disorders in your book, you touch on it briefly, but that both require us to learn a new relationship with something that we can't cut out entirely. Like, obviously, food, we need food to live, but also relating to others, which is what fawning is. Like, it feels like it's a survival mechanism, but it's, sometimes required. Can
Mm.
you speak more to that connection and why you see them as so intertwined?
Yeah. Um, well, I think fawning is I actually had someone on my podcast a few years ago. Her name's April Dawn Harder. She's a social worker, and she was had this whole theory of fawning or it was really for enmeshment being this chemical addiction. Like, when we enmesh, when we quickly have this connection with someone that is unboundaried, that feeling of like, "Oh, I wanna just crawl into your skin." Like, I felt that with people, where there's very fast intimacy, whether it's emotional, physical, whatever, that we get these endogenous opioids released in the brain, and it makes us high, and there's this, like, euphoric numbing experience that happens, and her theories are not backed by clinical studies. I don't think she got that far in the process, but I do find something very true about the addictive nature of fawning because I can feel that urge in myself. Like, I know how it feels to want to grab a cigarette or to want to reach for food or reach for something that will give me, relief. And fawning is the same exact experience. And the parallel that I draw to eating disorders in the book is that there are some substances and such that we can completely be cut out. Like I can say, "Okay, I'm never gonna drink alcohol again," or "I'm never going to smoke weed again," or whatever it is, but with relationships, I need to have relationships. And so instead of being absent, how is that how you say it? The word
Abstinent.
abstinent?
Yeah,
Abstinent.
yeah.
Instead of being abstinent in that sense, because that's not even an option. It's more, how do I develop a dialogue and a new relationship with this urge in me that may very well come out every time I'm interacting with someone. And it's very similar to eating disorders in the sense that I can't just not eat food ever again and never experience this. Like, it's something that we have to, it's just different. And so I hope that makes sense the way I explained it just now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, and I love that, that reference you made to that social worker's work about it being, like, kind of addictive because that makes so much sense, and it doesn't matter. I mean, I speak to food, but it doesn't matter if it's food, wine, weed, shopping, scrolling, it's like you're just looking for the relief, and I literally posted something yesterday about this and about the cycle of, I mean, I speak to parts, but about how, like, when people are being good, as in, like, that's what they call it, but it's restriction, or it feels like restriction in the body because it's like, oh, I'm missing out, but they think they're being good and they think that that's who they are. And then the blowout is, I guess, the problem, or not who they are, but it's like it's all part of the same cycle. And if we're not noticing, I guess, the reflexive behavior, and we just keep cycling. And when you're fawning in relationship and it's like something might feel a little bit unsafe, when you fawn again and like reconnect or appease that person, like it feels like such relief, especially if you grew up in environments where, relationships were unpredictable or people's moods were unpredictable. It's like I have to get this, it's like you're running an old pattern, you know? It's like you may not have been safe, whether it was emotionally, physically, or whatever, when you're a child, and you're still running the same script without realizing. So when, like, fawning becomes a reflex, like, women become so disconnected from their own bodies, and
Mhm.
that they genuinely can't tell. Often I experienced this when I was sort of coming out of this, like, "Oh, this is a reflex, and this is probably not quite healthy." But, like, couldn't tell what I was feeling or what I even wanted. And how does you see that disconnection show up, and what does that actually feel like from the inside or in the body?
Mm. Yeah, so fawning is very coupled with the physiology of the freeze response. I love freeze because, and I love talking about freeze because there's often a lot of shame coupled with freeze, like in fight and flight, especially in our world that really over couples mobility and movement and productivity with our value. When we have this response that immobilizes us, it can feel really confusing and shameful for the person experiencing it. But it's, I mean, I and holding space for the truth of that, and also it's just this incredible, they call it the savior response because it basically saves you from experiencing whatever horror it is that is currently happening. And so there's numbing, there's dissociation, and very frequently with fawning, we have some elements of freeze present. Um, because if we're interacting with a person that our body finds threatening and we're appeasing them and connecting with them, there's some sort of discomfort that is being numbed out. And so that can start to become kind of like you said, just shaping the nervous system. Like this just becomes my way of being is the body is not a comfortable place for me to be. It's not a safe place for me to be. So I'm just gonna not really spend anytime with the lens inwards. And anyways, fawning is such an outwards orientation. Um, yeah, and so with unfawning work, we start to swivel the light, the attention from other to self. And even if that is really because I work with people all the time that say, "Well, I feel nothing." It's like, "Oh, that's amazing." Like, notice that. Like, just notice that you feel nothing. Or like, "Oh, I feel really clenched." Okay, great. Yeah, notice that. It's like even just whatever's present, like there's no right or wrong way to do it. It's just collecting information. But it's just the practice of like swiveling the attention from other to self, even for a moment that is, yeah, and it's a practice, you know?
Mm.
There's nowhere to arrive to, which people ask me that all the time too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Um, yeah, that's so when we work with parts and we say, like, where do you feel the part in your body? And sometimes people say, well, I don't feel anything. And then they feel this shame around, well, I should feel. And I'm like, no, numb is a feeling.
Yeah.
Stay with that. And yeah, that turning inwards, something I see when people say have struggles with binge eating or emotional eating, it's like they haven't checked in with themselves. Maybe no, could say all day, but maybe not for decades. Like to actually just that inward facing, go, what am I feeling in my body right now? What would you, I know that it can be like numbness or I don't feel anything, but what do you notice like coming up in the body? Like, if you're noticing that's a reflex, like, where would you start? Like, what would you how would you describe fawning showing up in the body? What sensations would someone maybe feel, or what behavior would they exhibit?
It's so unique to each body. Um, Generally, there's a feeling of leaning forward. Um, there's energy that comes into the face. There might be a tension in the neck or the jaw. A lot of times fawning can, be accompanied with this, like, tunnel vision stare. It's almost like the person b is that you're interacting with is the threat, and there's this, like, tuning in. Like, I can't even really move my neck or my eyes, I'm just locked in, attuning to the facial expression, and, for myself, I notice I get very frozen in my neck and chest. I get tightness in my jaw, my neck starts to hurt, um, and I can feel where the fawning starts in me too. Like, it starts in my solar plexus, and there's this upward energy, um, but that's usually the first thing I do when I start working with people, either in group programs or individually, is how do you know that it's happening for you physiologically? And then after the fact, you can start to know because sometimes it's not even available to us in the moment because that numbing agent is so present. Sometimes it's not until after the fact that we're like, "Oh my god, my jaw is killing me now after that conversation." Yeah.
Yeah, it's
What
so
do you
like
notice usually for yourself?
um, generally like a tightness in my throat, and I notice like this, yeah, tightness in my jaw and like wanting to smile, and even though it doesn't feel like I'm kind of disconnected from it. But interestingly, I was just thinking about this because it's still a practice for me to just be curious about this stuff. And this year I had 2 cysts cut out of my scalp. Like there was nothing wrong. They were just cysts and they'd been there for 10 years. And I put it off because I thought I had to have patches of my head shaved. I didn't, but like I just didn't want to be walking around like a Chucky doll. So I've noticed since I got those out, because I still find myself sometimes I'll just hesitate to just say what I'm thinking or say what I feel, particularly in my relationship. And a couple of times when I've just not spoken up and then I've noticed I'm a little bit angry, and the 2 places where I had the cyst taken out, I don't get pain, but it just feels like pressure there, and I'm like, "Oh, that's super interesting."
Wow.
And I'm like, "Did they develop because I've been holding all this shit in for so many years," you know?
Yeah,
'Cause
that's really
it's been
interesting.
10 years, and I'm like, "This is super interesting that that's, like, the place that I feel pressure."
Yeah. I have
Yeah.
a cyst on my thyroid that
Mm.
my thyroid, and I notice when I start to go into fawning, my swallowing is, like, so hard to yeah, the cysts are really interesting. Like, I don't
Mm.
know what it is about them. I'm sure there's more about that from, like, Gabor Mate or but yeah, it's so interesting how our body arranges to protect or I don't know.
Yeah, and I've actually read that the metaphysical meaning of cyst is like there's rage underneath that, which makes so much sense.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Mm. Yeah,
Checks out.
yeah, totally. The body's so smart.
Yeah.
So for like fawning being this brilliant adaptation, I feel like some people say, "Oh, I'm better at people pleasing than I used to be," or they think that they need to just stop, but it's like it's not that simple. It is this brilliant adaptation and it's relational, but it has kept women safe and like often from a very young age. So how do we honor this without staying stuck in it?
Yeah, that's a great question. People ask me this every time I do a Q&A on my Instagram story. I always get the question, like, "How can I heal from fawning?" Or, uh, "Can it be healed completely?" And I think, like you said, it's kept women safe for so especially just systemically, how women not until the 19 I think it was 1974 in the United States, we didn't have credit cards. So we're financially dependent on men, and the system of marriage, which I think historically has been very disadvantageous to women, and, yeah, it completely it's this intelligent response that especially for those who are, um, in a sense of dependence on someone else, so valuable. And if you're in that kind of situation, like, fawn as much as you need, and I celebrate that in life or death situations or true, physical unsafety. I think it's so I'm just always amazed by the fawn response and its intelligence. And also, when we have the fawn response in us, that is so reflexive and it is pervasive. So it happens in our intimate relationships and at work and with our pets even. I used to let my dog just come and body slam me because I was like, I don't want to have boundaries with my dog. Like that's not a thing a nice person does. Um, that's when it can start to get kind of almost harmful to ourselves. And those are the places that we usually start with is like, where is it available to me to fawn less? Like, where do I not really need it? And then I always talk about how, like in my courses, how the greater the gap of incongruence. So I have the boundary expression, like I'm talking to someone and I'm not liking it and I want to tell them to go away. But instead I fawn and I say like, yeah, this is great, or I engage with them. The greater the gap of incongruence between the desired boundary expression of the body and what fawning performs instead, the greater the whiplash after. And so
Mm.
sometimes it's just, okay, I'm not going to tell my boss to fuck off. I hope it's okay I curse. I'm not gonna tell my boss to, go screw himself, even though that's what my body wants to do. But instead of engaging and smiling and nodding, I'm just going to say, okay, got it. And like we just bring the gap a little smaller. And so sometimes that's what unfawning work looks like is just how can I make the gap a little smaller and the burnout, the whiplash a little less.
Oh, you make such an important point there because I've seen this and I've seen it with myself too. But people who people please for decades and then they just get to this point where they will tell their boss to fuck off because it's just been like decades of this having your boundaries crossed, not speaking up. I've seen it in a workplace once. Like I was used to work with someone who was she was in she was always fawning and I could see this dynamic unfolding before my very eyes because her boss was like really quite awful, and she would just take it, and then one day she just, like, got up, went to the toilets, couldn't stop crying, and then she just said, "I'm leaving," and she literally left and she never came back, and she yeah, it was not a good time. But and I've seen it myself. Like I people please and fawn for so long with people and let them just cross my boundaries. And eventually I'd have enough. And then I'd be like, no, I'm not doing it. And I'd react in this kind of outward way. And then they'd just be like, oh my God. Because and then I thought it would just make me retract again because I was like, well, I can't speak my truth because this is how people react. But in actual fact, it was me having an outburst because
Yeah.
I just had enough. And it's like being able to, yeah, just slowly come back, like let your nervous system, you know, it's like titration, like just bringing it back like a little bits at a time, just what's digestible, what's palatable for you, and not like, burning the house down on telling your boss to fuck off. Because
Yeah.
then you'll retract back, you'll be like it's like after a binge, I guess, but it's like it creates that relief, but then you're like, "Oh my god, I'm a terrible person," and you go on a shame spiral, and then it causes you to go right back to the start, but just like small bits at a time, bite-sized pieces.
Yes. And
Yeah.
they say the body's always trying to find equilibrium. So if you have been like this woman you're describing, who I love at your work, who's like people pleasing every day for years and years, at a certain point, the body's like, okay, well, if I'm so far over here in this constriction, I'm going to swing the other way because I'm trying to just find that middle ground, that equilibrium. But for those of us who have been fawning for a long time, we have so many swallowed boundary expressions. And like you said, because I've done the exact same thing, and almost everyone I've worked with does the same thing with friends. We're like, I'm not doing this anymore. And they're like, we just asked for you to come to a movie. Like, what is this about? Um, so yeah, it's that titration is so supportive. And I also what brings or what comes to mind is I was in a group program recently that I'm running right now called Shed, and it's about all of this fawning. And someone said, I wish I could just express myself as it came and not put it in the dam and then have it build up. Like, what would that be like to just be like, oh, actually, I didn't really like that instead of like adding it to the 10 years. And then it's like, oh, and then it all comes out. Um, yeah.
Yeah, and, like, letting people see I see this all the time, like, people that are afraid to be seen or they won't be themselves or let that expression come out, but I'm like, just let little pieces of yourself come out and just do little tests with people. See how they respond to that. You might act a little crazy sometimes, and some people will be like, "You're weird," and you're like, "Okay, cool, you're not a safe person for me to bring that to," but it's like the people who are right for you, you can bring a little crazy, and then the more like, my husband, when I met him and I started acting weird, and he's just like, "Oh, yeah, more of this, please." And I was just like, "Okay," but it's like test the little bits before you feel like you can just that's good for you and it's good for the relationship as well. Like, you're just letting it naturally evolve,
Yeah, I love that.
going all in.
Mhm.
Yeah. So what tends to shift first for a woman who does this work? Like, what's usually the hardest thing do you see for her to maybe loosen her grip on?
Um, I think from my experience just working with people and running these programs is the sexual fawning just brings in this energy that I really am never surprised by, but it's always this like there's always shame there of like, why am I doing this? And a lot of confusion. Um, because sex is so often nonverbal and so highly relational. It's usually something that fawning just jumps right into because especially if you've fawned in other areas of your life, at this point your body knows it says the body's success is survival. And so it got you this far. And so I think that seems to be the area that feels like the most sticky. Yeah.
Yeah. For someone that's never heard of sexual fawning, I hear you speak about it a lot on Instagram, but can you just explain like what that is and what that might look like to someone that's never heard of it?
Yeah, so sexual fawning, it is fawning, so that experience of the body having a desired boundary expression that gets frozen, and then a performance of connection. And, can happen in, assault settings, but I usually talk about it in, like, safe partner contexts. Um, typically well, fawning in general is a way for us to get our attachment needs met, but I think definitely in sexual context, it's a way to secure connection, get our attachment needs met. So that means feeling seen and valued and witnessed and cared for, and keeping someone around. And so I think that's why, honestly, there's so many men like walking around thinking they're really great in bed when really we've just been faking orgasms this whole time. Um, and instead of, again, that orientation towards self of like, is this feeling good for me? Am I present? Do I have a pit in my belly right now? Um, am I wanting more? Am I wanting a breath? Versus the fawning posturing, which is like, how can I move? How can I make sounds in a way that uh, pleases the other person. So
Mhm.
there not that we never do that, but the orientation is the majority towards the partner and how to tend to the partner over tending to self. And I think a lot of people have this experience of just not having much connection to what's present for them during a sexual experience.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah. And then I know you've got a course on sexual fawning, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So like when someone I guess does that course or does that work on that kind of thing, what do you see on the other side of that? Like how do things change for them? Because I think this is such an important piece to touch on because this shows up in food as well, but people's relationship to food can often be a mirror to their relationship to pleasure. It's like, am I allowed to have it? Am I going to like not let myself have it? Am I not going to allow myself to, just be here and enjoy this piece of chocolate, like, or whatever it is?
Mhm.
Oh no, that's bad. But like, obviously, pleasure is connected to sex and sensuality. So, what do you see is on the other side of this? Because I think this is all interconnected.
Yeah, completely. I'm also being reminded of something Luis Mojica said about food, which it's just like the most intimate relationship because it goes inside of your body
Mm.
and how there's really parallels to like it's so personal and highly intimate. Um, I think that there's a de-shaming that happens that's really special. I think people, a lot of it's mostly women that I work with. A lot of the women I work with, sexually fawn or their bodies sexually fawn, and then they feel ashamed about it after. And there's also a confusion that's typically present after an experience of sexually fawning. Like, you may have sex with a safe partner, and then after you're like you feel kind of weird or irritated with them or even angry at them because there's been some kind of suppressed boundary expression. No fault to them, it wasn't expressed. But I think having a cognitive understanding of the process is really supportive. Um, I think there's a embodied presence that starts to happen. It may there's the body really likes to move slow, and so in the amount of time I've been doing this work, I haven't had someone have these, like, crazy transformations in terms of their sex life. I think it's more of just a like you said, a titrated, slowly coming back, a little bit more presence, a little bit more checking in, a little less shame, and, like you said, more pleasure, and usually I offer that aspect first in non-sexual ways, like where where and what brings your body a sense of pleasure. And even that word sometimes I don't even say because there's even overcouplings around pleasure. And so I'll say like what feels good for you? Is it like laying in bed? And another thing that's coming to mind is the physiology and the posturing of pleasure requires an opening. Like, if you think of orgasm or if you think of someone taking in the sun, there's this extension happening in the spine. The neck looks up, the back opens, the heart. It's a very vulnerable position, especially for someone, like we talked about at the beginning, who has a posture of bracing and hunching. This posture of bracing can feel so protective and safe. And so that opening to what feels good can actually feel really unsafe. And that's one thing people say a lot. And so what we'll work on is okay, when you do find yourself in a moment of pleasure or something feels good in a non sexual way, like, oh, I'm drinking my tea or I'm cuddling with my dog, can you pause and really let that in? Because we have to start to build our capacity for pleasure as
Mm.
well. I'm sure you know about that if you're, using this in regards to food.
Yeah, absolutely. You're so right too. I remember I spoke to another somatic psychologist on the podcast and we were talking about pleasure and she said, I don't even go there. Like we bring it back. She said, because obviously if you're feeling pleasure, you're generally in a parasympathetic state. Like your body is feeling like relaxed enough to feel that. But she said, I'll bring it back because obviously pleasure will signal to you that you're safe, but like bring that back. It's like, well, what's comfortable? It's like,
Mhm.
does this piece of clothing feel comfortable on my skin? Like, how do my sheets feel on my skin? It's like, just bring it back to like, well, how does that feel? Like, does that make you feel uncomfortable or comfortable? And it's like, that's I guess, the opening of the window first before we'd actually go to pleasure. And you're right, like people have some very complex relationships to pleasure, or even just they hear it and they immediately think it's sexual and it's not. But it's like even opening their perspective to there's a whole world of pleasure that does not involve sex at all. But obviously, it's like affecting your relationship with it.
Right. That's why I really love Deb Dana's glimmer practice. Are you
Hmm.
familiar with that?
I have heard of it. Yeah.
It's like, um, basically putting pleasure down into the tiniest little molecule and just noticing like, "Oh, I like how the sun's coming in through that window," or, "Oh, this blanket feels nice against my skin," and just naming it and maybe, like, telling a friend about it later, but it's so, um, digestible, the practice, and it starts to actually signal to the brain like, "Oh, I live in a world where beautiful things exist and where there's certain micro moments of safety," and I feel like that is often more accessible because I have a background from the tantra space,
Hmm.
and that is so extreme, I feel sometimes, like, it's, like, wants to bring this from what I've found, or at least in the tantra world I was in, a lot of the goals were around these ecstatic moments of pleasure, and then I think that really is too much for most people who, we, like, work these jobs and we're moving and we're most of us are often in sympathetic, and so that is not accessible or possibly even traumatic for some people, like, that high expression, so the glimmer practice is just so, accessible, and I love it, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. And you're right. Like for some people, it's like that's too much for them. But also for, I think for people who may enter that world and they haven't started small, there can then be shame around it. Oh, I can't get there, or that's just not attainable for me. And it's
Completely,
like,
yeah.
it starts small.
Mhm.
So I'll lead into my final and my very favorite question. If a woman's listening right now, if her body could speak to her uninterrupted, what would it most want her to hear?
Can you repeat the question?
For a woman listening right now, if her body could speak to her uninterrupted, what would it most want her to hear?
I think whatever's there. What's coming to mind is this quote from David Bedrick's book. It's called The Unshaming Way, and he says, "What if every single sensation and experience we were having was the utmost intelligence of the body?" Like jealousy or anger or whatever, insecurity, like whatever's there is perfect. 'Cause I don't know what's there for her, but whatever's there is perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Kelly. It's been amazing, and I've just loved having this conversation with you. If
Thank
anyone would like to find you, where is the best place that they can do that?
I'm on Instagram and TikTok at Kallie Somatic, so Kali period SOMATICS. I also have a YouTube channel. My podcast is the Your Own Medicine podcast, and then I'm coming out with a book in the next week or so called Tired of Being Good, and that will be available on Amazon.
Amazing. We can link to all of that in the show notes as well.
Awesome.
All right. Thanks so much, Kelly.
Thank you.
This podcast is intended for educational and informational purposes only and is not a substitute for therapy, medical advice, or professional health care. If this episode brings up anything difficult for you, please consider reaching out to a trained healthcare professional, therapist, or support service. In Australia, you can contact Lifeline on 131114 or the Butterfly Foundation National Helpline on 1800 33 4673, which provides support for people experiencing eating disorders and body image concerns. Thank you so much for listening. If this episode resonated, please follow or subscribe to the podcast, leave a review, or share it with someone who might benefit from hearing it. You can also connect with me on Instagram at Megan Darnell Therapy. If you share the episode or want to let me know what landed for you, you're always welcome to message or tag me. I love hearing from you guys. Until next time, I'm Megan Darnell, and this is The Self-Led Woman.